Good morning. It is Thursday, January the 24th, and this is The Drill. Good morning. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States of America today, because I'm the only one that makes the presumption for the status quo. Speaking to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. Once upon a time, the teacher of Moses called upon mankind with a warning. At a certain date, he said all the water in the world which had not been specially hoarded would disappear. It would then be renewed with different water, which would drive men mad. Only one man listened to the meaning of this advice. He collected water and went to a secure place where he stored it, and waited for the water to change its character. On the appointed date, the stream stopped running, the wells went dry, and the man who had listened, seeing this happening, went to his retreat and drank his preserved water. When he saw from his security the waterfalls again beginning to flow, this man descended among the other sons of men. He found that they were thinking and talking in an entirely different way from before. Yet they had no memory of what had happened, nor of having been warned. When he tried to talk to them, he realized that they thought he was mad, and they showed hostility or compassion, not understanding. At first he drank none of the new water, but he went back to his concealment to draw on his supplies every day. Finally, however, he took the decision to drink the new water, because he could not bear the loneliness of living, behaving, and thinking in a different way from everyone else. He drank the new water and became like the rest. Then he forgot all about his own store of special water, and his fellows began to look upon him as a madman who had miraculously been restored to sanity. And this is the state of affairs in the United States of America today, and in a lot of countries around the world, particularly in Europe, perhaps also in Venezuela. And that's why I like to read this. I don't think it can be overemphasized, the fact that this is not a political battle, not even a cultural battle, but a psychosocial battle. It's a battle for men's sanity. So, and it reminds me a large extent to my foster parents. My foster mother, who was both of them were Dutch. They came here in 1960 from Holland. And they took us in when me and my sister, when we were about 6 years old, and they were socialists. And again, not socialists because they spouted socialist slogans. These people were committed to it. They acted it. They had their act together socialist, sort of socialist-wise. My foster mother hated this country because it was, as far as concerned, it was the headquarters of capitalism. Her attitude was that the entire planet was basically a struggle against capitalists and capitalism, that everything in life was a capitalist plot to get rich at your expense. Death, being sick, buying over-the-counter medication. She wouldn't let us take aspirin when we had a headache because it was, as I realized later, she didn't say so at the time. She would say, well, wait, see if it'll go away. And at first I thought it was because they were cheap, and because they're very, very cheap people. But we didn't need to be cheap. We were foster children. First of all, the county was giving these folks a stipend, a monthly stipend, so that they could pay for our clothes and food and whatnot. So technically, me and my sister didn't cost them a nickel, but yet they were always scrimping and saving and pinching pennies. And it wasn't until much later that I realized it had nothing to do with being frugal. It had nothing to do with trying for goals. A lot of times you scrimp and save to achieve certain goals, so you can afford to go to college, so you can afford to buy a house, that kind of thing. Not so for these folks. My foster father made good money. He worked at Caltech, and my foster mother worked outside of the home sometimes for extra money. They ended up buying a house, buying a brand new car, all that stuff. So it wasn't necessary from a financial standpoint for them to pinch pennies. And it wasn't until years later that I figured it out, that it really had more to do with their sociology and their politics than anything else. That really this was their way of sticking it to the man, so to speak. That they figured that aspirin was just a plot by Bayer Aspirin Company to make a profit. You know, it's not necessary for headache. You don't need aspirin to deal with a headache. So that kind of thing. I was almost died because of their socialistic attitudes. Because as far as they were concerned, there's no problem that couldn't be solved without a good attitude, and by socializing. You know, so that's the point. And my foster mother would use tools and techniques, socialist tools and techniques, to try to do to me what I just read in this story about how when the waters changed, where she would, if I forgot to do something, I made her mad in some way, shape, or form, she would just pretend I didn't exist. And I mean, not just the cold shoulder where all she'll say is goodbye or good night or good morning, but other than that, she has not much to say to you. No, I mean nothing. She doesn't acknowledge your existence. And under the theory that everybody is determined by forces beyond their control. And she intended to be a force and to force me to do what it is that she wanted. Unfortunately, for her, determinism is BS. And everybody has free will, including me, even as a kid. And I went for it the first time. I broke down. I cried. It was a terrifying experience the first time. But afterwards, I started getting used to it, and I learned to deal with it. And she had less and less of an effect on me as time went by. And determinism goes right down the toilet with it. So, but that's, again, this is what the socialists are up to. They want to get in your psyche. And I think that it changed from actually doing some kind of a physical overthrow of the government, a physical revolution, to trying to get into people's psyche and psychologically brainwash people into wanting and accepting socialism right around the time of the Clarence Thomas hearings. Subsequent to those hearings, which were very tumultuous, there was an article, I remember, that was printed, and I don't remember what magazine, it was some left-wing magazine, but it was an editorial article about the confirmation process, and that suggesting that the left was going about things in the wrong way by trying to put people on the court or looking at a top-down situation, that the way to socialize the country was to put the right politicians in the right offices. And they were insisting, no, that's not what needs to be done. What we need to do, the editorial went on to say, is get in their psyche. And that's a quote. And so when I see what's going on today, all of the things that seem to make no sense to other people makes perfect sense to me, because I know exactly what they're trying to do. They're trying to get in people's psyche, trying to psych them out. It's basically, when you get right down to it, what makes it scary is that it's adults are doing it, but it's 7th grade crap. It's like going back to junior high school. You know, that's the way I feel. It's like, oh, crap, I got to go through this again? I went through all this bullshit when I was in the 7th and 8th grade. But it's come back. But what makes it a little bit scarier is it's one thing when you're dealing with children who have no authority, no power. And it's another thing entirely when you're dealing with full-grown adults. That makes it kind of on the scary side. So when I come back, we're going to be looking at some Rush Limbaugh, and then after that, Ayn Rand's Lexicon, and we'll go from there. And thank you very much. Welcome back. Let's see. So anyways, we got lazy journalists use Twitter hate to redefine normal in America. And again, redefining normal. What are they basically doing is that they're getting right back to sanity and right back to reality, right? Latest on the shutdown in the State of the Union. So on the shutdown in the State of the Union, there's all of this is Donald Trump's fault. What's going on right now? It's his own damn fault. I was so disappointed last year. I voted for Donald Trump, but whether or not I'm going to vote for him a second time is up in the air at this particular point. He's got to come through with the wall. He has to. I'm not going to accept any excuses. If he doesn't come through with it, that's it. I vote for somebody else. Done deal. So, and particularly in light of the fact that you can try to make the argument about, well, Democrats are thwarting him or whatever bull. He had the opportunity to shut the government down last year. And if he had shut it down last year, he'd have owned Washington. That's when he had all the power. I'm not the only one to notice this. There was another talk show host that said exactly the same thing, that recognized and said exactly the same thing. He gave away all his power by signing a continuing resolution that took us past the elections. Okay? He should have said, no, screw you. I'm not signing anything. And shut the government down last year. Then he would have had leverage. Okay. Now, there is some talk that some of the Democrats are starting to show cracks. There's Democrats that are urging Nancy Pelosi to give him the wall and do this and, whatnot. The point is, whether it's going to work or not, it doesn't matter. It was unnecessary. That Donald Trump could have had everything he wanted and quicker if he had done this last year. And I think he recognized that he made a mistake last year. He said, next time, no way. But it's too late now. The horse is out of the barn. The Democrats run the House. The Democrats run the House. He's got to also remember that Republicans aren't necessarily his friends. Okay, especially in Congress, because each one of them have their own re-elections they've got to attend to. And they're not national re-elections. Senators have to get re-elected within their state, and of course, the representatives have to get re-elected within their districts. But so you got to go out there and remember that the members of Congress are selfish people. Okay, they'll help the president out if they think it's going to get them re-elected. If they're not sure, then maybe. So Donald Trump should have, again, he could have owned them. He could have said, look, I'm going to stop everything right now, and I'm going to veto your bill, and if you think you can override it, knock yourself out, which they couldn't because they didn't have 2/3 majority, the Republicans, and the Republicans would have given him anything he wanted because there's no way they wanted to shut, because it would have fallen hard on the Republican Party. The Republicans had all branches of government. So it's Donald Trump's fault that we're in the position we're in now. And so I have no sympathy for the guy. He blew it. I think he knows he blew it. He might be able to bail this out and end up getting a wall anyhow. And if he does, fine, he gets my vote. But if he doesn't, I'm not even going to think twice. I'll vote for Jeb Bush before I vote for Donald Trump if he doesn't get the wall. Another one, let's see, New Orleans ticket holder suit, which I covered yesterday. It's about just a big piece of crap about officiating and trying to make it seem as though that the only way people can be successful is with luck or cheating or a combination of the two. There's the pointless polls say Trump can't beat any of the Democrats. What you need to know about polls and how they manipulate people. When I was growing up as a kid in the 60s and 70s, the way it worked with polls is that the news agencies would report polls as the following. They would say the following. A poll was conducted about the President of the United States, let's say a popularity poll, and 47% of those surveyed liked the President. 36% of those did not approve, let's say, did not like or did not approve of the President. Notice, okay, now let me finish this up and then we'll get back to it. But now the way it's reported is 47% of Americans approve what the president is doing, 36% disapprove. Americans. That's the difference, is that word, Americans. Back in the day, they recognized that a 1,000 person survey is not a representative sampling, that you cannot imply that what the results you're getting from the 1,000 people expand to cover 350 million. It just doesn't work. So they didn't report it that way. They didn't report it as all 47% of Americans. They would say 47% of those surveyed. And it puts the survey in its proper context. And as a listener or viewer, then you're saying, oh, okay, well, that's kind of interesting. But that's it. Today, surveys and polls are used as weapons. Or another way to put it is that they're used to shape reality. So that's why they say 47% of Americans, because what they're trying to do is push people in a particular direction. They're taking a stand. One of the ways, and I think the best way to discourage people in the news business from doing this anymore is for the people to demand non-profit news. Because all of the cable companies, the television companies, radio news, all of that is driven by profits. It didn't used to be that way. Again, when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, we had Walter Cronkite, Roger Mudd, and people like that. Walter Cronkite was considered the gold standard of reporters. And there's a lot of people that say, well, it's because he was an exceptional person. No, it had nothing to do with it. They were all exceptional people. And the reason was because the news was not for profit. It was something that the ABC, NBC, CBS were given licenses. The airwaves are considered public. They're owned by nobody in particular. They're owned by everybody. And so what the government does is give licenses to various companies so that they can go ahead and broadcast on particular frequencies, etc. So ABC, NBC, CBS all have licenses. Part of the deal with the license was that the companies had to they give news away for free. Basically, it was not something that they were going to do for profit. Everything else in their programming was for profit. They would do talk shows and variety shows and comedies and dramas and stuff like that. But that was all commercial television designed to get a profit. So in order to, as part of their licensing agreement, they would do the news and do it as a non-profit situation. What that meant was the only thing the news people had, only motivation they had, was their integrity. Okay, because they were non-profit, first of all, they could be trusted not to be skewing things, not to be picking what goes on the news based on what it is that's going to attract ratings. Say they're not going to be in the ratings business. They're going to go after what's news based on what's new and what's important. So, then I believe it was in the 80s, it changed. There was some individual that came along, gave people the idea, and maybe it was the law was changed. I don't remember the details. But presto, almost overnight, we had for-profit news. And news and the reliability of news agencies and the people that broadcast the news has gone down ever since. Because the news departments can do anything they want. They can say the most outrageous things you've ever heard of and justify it or rationalize it by saying, sorry, I have ratings to think about. So when the people are demanding that we go back to nonprofit news, and we go back to nonprofit news, they will no longer have a ratings motivator. They'll be back to being motivated by their integrity, by going out and reporting actual news and not ginning up propaganda. So, let me see what else we got. Liberal lunacy, emasculated men. Let's see. What is this one? Let's look at this for a second. Masculine men, that was the thing I was going to say about this, about men and toxic masculinity and anti-white. It seemed to come out of nowhere. All of a sudden, some professor in Harvard said, that's it. All white people have to be obliterated. And I was like, what? Where the hell did this come from? It's stunned to me. You're kidding. You're actually advocating genocide? Are you serious? And we're not talking about somebody from the Black Panthers or some other kind of a radical group. We're talking about a Harvard professor that is advocating the obliteration or abolition of the white race. What? And now you also have the twin of that is the talk about toxic masculinity and getting rid of masculinity. By the way, the toxic masculinity is a false dilemma or faulty dichotomy in that they don't mean, you would think they mean that there's good masculinity and toxic masculinity. No. As far as the left is concerned, all masculinity is toxic. Now, let me explain. What you got going in both cases, what has happened in the past, in the 1950s, 1960s, you had civil rights movements, and they were designed to benefit certain groups at the expense of others or another. Okay? In the case of women's rights, by the way, there is no such thing. There are no group rights, only individual rights. But in the case of women's rights, one of the issues was a woman's ability to control her own body, hence birth control, hence abortion. Okay? So they get both of those things dealt with. We get the pill, and we have Roe v. Wade. So everything's hunky-dory, right? Women have now been empowered. Women can now choose when to get pregnant. Okay? They can choose. And supposedly, I guess this would be a power over men because they could veto the man's sperm, so to speak. You know, they can exercise absolute power. I've changed my mind. I don't want to be pregnant. Boom. I'm going out and getting an abortion. Right? So this is where women are thinking that everything is hunky-dory. Women have power over men, and women will make all the decisions about whether or not we're going to procreate, and et cetera, et cetera. So, sounds good, except after about a decade, Gloria Steinem, who was the national president of the National Organization for Women for a period of time, came out and said words to the effect that she was disappointed because all of the progress that was made on behalf of women actually benefited men. Now let's stop and think about that for a second and see how true it is, especially in the case of birth control and abortion. Who really benefited from the pill and from abortion? Women or 18 to 25-year-old males? Frat boys. You bet they did. Because then they get to go out and sow their wild oats and they don't have to worry about putting on a condom. They don't have to put on a condom. And if the woman forgets to take the pill, here's $20, go get an abortion. And the man goes off jaunty jolly and goes out and slings his seed again and again and again and again. Who takes and who is it that has to bear the responsibilities here? The woman. The woman is taking the pill. The pill is doing is messing with her hormones, making her body think that it's already pregnant so that it won't ovulate or it won't produce the hormones that are going to put a woman in a position to get pregnant. Okay, so you're messing with her hormones. There's going to be side effects from that. The woman has to bear the side effects, not the man. The man just walks away. Abortion, same thing. The woman is the one that has to go and actually undergo the procedure, no matter who pays for it. The woman has to go lay down on a cold table, put her legs up in the stirrups, and undergo the procedure, and then suffer the physical and psychological consequences. While the man is probably, while she's laying in on her back with her legs in the stirrups, he's probably out boning somebody else. So who really benefited from this big advancement for women? Men did. Take a look at racism in this country and the Civil Rights Act. Again, supposed to benefit blacks at the expense of whites. Put blacks in a superior position to whites in this country. That's what it was really supposed to be all about. Empowering blacks. Okay, not equality, empowerment. That's a different idea altogether. And what really happened? Who's really the beneficiary of the civil rights movement? Whites, white men. Why? Because when I was growing up in this country and I was a kid, you would have other kids that would come up and start telling you black jokes, Mexican jokes, Jewish jokes, but primarily black jokes. As that, or they would come up and use the N-word, refer to blacks as the N-word. There was another story that I heard from a guy in high school, and he was telling me about how his brother, and he was laughing about it, that his brother would like to go out on weekends. His brother's hobby was to get a couple of his friends together. His brother was older than he was, and go in a car, and his brother was apparently quite tall, quite big guy. And they were white, and they would get in a car, and they would go up to, they lived in South Pasadena, they would go up to Pasadena to the west side. Because when I was growing up, Pasadena was informally segregated. All blacks lived basically on the west side, and all whites on the rest, in the rest of town. So he would go up to the west side and go cruising around and look for blacks to beat. He would bait them, and when they would get, he would use various racial epithets or slurs to encourage them to try to fight him. He would then get out of the car with a rubber hose and beat them. And this guy would laugh about it. And I'm under pressure at this particular point. Today, if that kind of thing happened, I would be easily able to tell a guy what an asshole he is and call him all kinds of other names and tell him I don't ever want to see him or talk to him again. Go screw yourself. When I was growing up, you couldn't do that. Because it seemed like most of the white people you ran into had that kind of an attitude. Along comes the Civil Rights Act. All of a sudden, it's not popular to do that anymore. Attitudes change. And who benefited from it? I did. Because I don't have to put up with that anymore. I don't have to listen to that. Because it wasn't even also about listening to it. It was about the expectation that I would participate. This idea that sort of a down for the struggle thing. Down for the white race. They're going to tell off-color jokes and find out whether or not you're down for the white race. Because there was also a phrase called N-word lover. Okay? If you came out and said, hey, what do you know, and you objected to what was going on, off-color jokes, or this ugly story that this guy, high school classmate was telling me, then you were considered an N-word lover. And you were ostracized, or they would attempt to ostracize you. So you're under tremendous amount of social pressure, not only to accept and listen to this stuff, but to contribute yourself, to come up with, to respond with black jokes and stories similar to the one that the guy told me. But now, because of the civil rights movement, I'm off the hook. I don't have to do that. Like I said, I can tell people like that to F off and stay that way. Don't ever come, and then I can go out on social media and expose them for the pieces of crap they really are. So, now, the argument, of course, can be made, well, blacks benefited as well. Yes, but that wasn't the point. It wasn't equality's never the point of this. It was the empowerment of women, the empowerment of blacks, the empowerment of Hispanics, at the expense of white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. But it seems that whites, particularly white men, have benefited at least as much as everyone else. And in some cases, more so. That's where the professor comes in. He's brainstorming all this stuff, thinking, how can we come up with some kind of movement where we can empower people at the expense of white men? And he finally comes down to the conclusion that it's impossible. He realizes there is no possible way. We all live together. We're all in the United States. What benefits one benefits everyone. And he can't stand that idea. That's where he says, that's it. All white people have got to go. And then the toxic masculinity. all men have to go. But the problem is, of course, it's really insane to suggest that you're going to go ahead and euthanize every male, murder every male in the country, and euthanize male children. I mean, it's just... So what do? Is they ask themselves, what is it that makes a man? Masculinity. Oh, okay, well, then we'll just consider masculinity toxic, and what we will do is drive all men to act and react and respond like women. And in the process, we then have eliminated men from the planet. So anyways, let's see. I guess let me see what else we got here with Rush Limbaugh. Yeah, that's good for right now. And when I come back, I'm going to be reading from Ayn Rand's Lexicon. And thank you very much. And the Ayn Rand Lexicon, where she's explaining a lot of the concepts and abstractions that are important, and a lot of the ones that she uses in her book. So it's helpful to read this to get a better understanding of where it is she's coming from, particularly since she was born in Russia. She speaks 3 languages, or spoke. She passed away, of course, but she spoke Russian, English, and French. She says that English was her favorite language because it was much more expressive. But it gives you an idea of why she writes the way she does and communicates the way she does. It's stilted, it's kind of awkward. It's rather awkward in the way she tries to communicate, sometimes because she's not a native English speaker. So today's concept is envy/hatred of the good for being the good. Today, we live in the age of envy. Envy is not the emotion I have in mind, but is the clearest manifestation of an emotion that has remained nameless. It is the only element of a complex emotional sum that men have permitted themselves to identify. Envy is regarded by most people as a petty, superficial emotion, and therefore it serves as a semi-human cover for so inhuman emotion that those who feel it seldom dare admit it even to themselves. That emotion is hatred of the good for being the good. This hatred is not resentment against some prescribed view of the good with which one does not agree. Hatred of the good for being the good means hatred of that which one regards as good by one's own conscious or subconscious judgment. It means hatred of a person for possessing a value or virtue one regards as desirable. If a child wants to get good grades in school, but he is unable or unwilling to achieve them and begins to hate the children who do, that is hatred of the good. If a man regards his intelligence as a value, but is troubled by self-doubt and begins to hate the men he judges to be intelligent, that is hatred of the good. The nature of the particular values a man chooses to hold is not the primary factor in this issue, although irrational values may contribute a great deal to the formation of that emotion. The primary factor and distinguishing characteristic is an emotional mechanism set in reverse, a response of hatred, not toward human vices, but toward human virtues. To be exact, the emotional mechanism is not set in reverse, but is set one way. Its exponents do not experience love for evil men. Their emotional range is limited to hatred or indifference. It is impossible to experience love, which is a response to values, when one's automized response to values is hatred. Consider the full meaning of this attitude. Values are that which one acts to gain or keep. Values are a necessity of man's survival, and wider, of any living organism's survival. Life is a process of self-sustaining, and self-generated action, and the successful pursuit of values is a precondition of remaining alive. Since nature does not provide man with an automatic knowledge of the code of values he requires, there are differences in the codes which men accept and the goals they pursue. But consider the abstraction value apart from the particular content of any given code, and ask yourself, what is the nature of a creature in which the sight of a value arouses hatred and the desire to destroy? In the most profound sense of the term, such a creature is a killer, not a physical, but a metaphysical one. It is not an enemy of your values, but of all values. It is an enemy of anything that enables man to survive. It is an enemy of life as such and of everything living. They do not want to own your fortune. They want you to lose it. They do not want to succeed. They want you to fail. They do not want to live. They want you to die. They desire nothing. They hate existence. And they keep running, each trying not to learn that the object of his hatred is himself. They are the essence of evil. They, those anti-living objects who seek, by devouring the world, to fill the selfless zero of their soul. It is not your wealth that they're after. Theirs is a conspiracy against the mind, which means against life and man. And that was the from the Ayn Rand Lexicon, and it was the concept of envy. That was the concept of the day. And so at this particular point, that brings us to the conclusion of another episode of The Drill. And until next time, thank you very much for listening, and have a great day.